Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode is the Queen of Grimdark, who is known for her fierce, exquisitely written, and gripping fantasy.
She is the author of the Empire of Dust trilogy and the folk horror fantasy A Sword of Bronze and Ashes. We would like to warmly welcome Anna Smith Spark.
Hello, Anna.
Oh, hello. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us. So I must admit, actually, I've been a fan of your work for a while. I read the first of the Empire of Dust a long time ago, and so it's a real privilege for me to be able to talk to you tonight. So thank you again for coming on.
Oh, thank you.
But we also encountered you at the FantasyCon in Chester recently, and we both thought you were very good on the panels there, talking very eloquently about things that we care about. So thank you for that as well. So you mentioned in a recent British Fantasy Society interview that you often listen to Fairport Convention while you write. What do you reckon it is about that band that sets you up for writing?
Oh, goodness. Well, I love folk music. I mean, yeah, folk music is kind of essentially fantasy in musical form. I really love folk music. I grew up with folk music, and yeah. So, but then, and Sandy Denny's voice is just so beautiful as well. The kind of the yearning, the sorrow, the beauty in it, the joyfulness in it, in her happy songs. It's just so Legion Leaf, which is their kind of one of their really important album. That's just, I grew up with that. My mum used to listen to it a lot when I was a child, and I think the stories in the songs have shaped me, had a huge influence on me and my writing, and just her voice, Sandy Denny's voice, just the way she captures feeling and the beauty of some of her songs. The song, it's not actually on Legion Leaf. It's a kind of special edition. If you get the special edition of it, it's at the end as an outtake. It's a very, very beautiful song called "The Quiet Joys of Brotherhood," which is just Sandy Denny on her own singing unaccompanied, and it's just beautiful. It's just astonishingly beautiful and very sad. It had a huge influence on the writing of A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, and yeah,
that's absolutely lovely. For myself, when I read that was really exciting because my dad is a huge Fairport Convention fan, to the point where when I was a kid, I used to go to Croppery Festival, which is Fairport's festival in Banbury. So I'm sort of reasonably intimately acquainted with the band, but it would have been post Sandy really when I was going, because she died quite young, didn't she? That's unfortunate.
Yeah, she had a horrible, sad life.
Yeah, but the track Matty Groves, their version of Matty Groves, I think I've introduced you to, Nico, in the past, and that's a particularly good version of that, I think.
I really do agree with your thoughts on how folk does the kind of classical, fantastical storytelling thing so well. I feel like they really do, most good folk bands really weave a tale and then just add super good music on top normally as well. There is an art to good folk, isn't there? And it's wonderful stuff.
I mean, it's kind of like, it's sort of in some ways, because it is folk music. If we're talking about the kind of traditional Western European medieval fantasy that I suppose I'm really writing in. I mean, it's kind of, there's a sense of, okay, this is kind of the music that my characters might be listening to. You know, this is the kind of music that might be going on, the kind of classic, the market square or the tavern. This is kind of the music that might be in the background, but also, yeah, it's the kind of music that's telling the kind of stories. And there's usually magic. Folk music often has slightly strange, supernatural. It's not rational stories. I mean, Tam Lin is one of my my favourite on Legion Leaf is either Tam Lin or Sir Patrick Spens, and both of those are obviously, Tam Lin's about an elf and the Queen of the Fairies, and Patrick Spence as a mermaid, and is about the fact that, and is about a shipwreck and the shipwreck being foreseen. So yeah, I mean, they're both really magical stories, and yeah, they're both proper fantasy stories. So yeah, so I just love folk music, and yeah, and I have it on a lot when I'm writing. Annie Tchaikovsky is doing some work about this, about science fiction and fantasy writers and whether they listen to music when they're writing, and how they listen to music and how it might affect their writing. She lectures and studies in psychology and music, so she's
wow.
really interested in this. Yeah, she's doing this big project talking to lots and lots of different science fiction and fantasy authors about how they use music as part of their creative writing process as authors, and she's really interested in this. Yeah.
That's particularly fascinating because that was a question on this podcast for a long time, that we used to ask people about if they did listen to music whilst they were writing. So that's definitely an interest of ours. So I'm sure we'd be interested in reading what she comes up with.
Right, I am worried that we're going to end up in a folk hole, which is very possible with this group. So I'm going to pull us out of it and get us onto business for the day. Now, Ben, you're going to be reading first today, and our prompt is Winterfest. So, give me chills.
Winterfest. She's a bit ripe. How far have you come? The Eastern Hills. We had a farm there. No wonder she's bloating. Your wife? Sister. The bracelets on the bursar's wrist jingled as he probed the corpse's belly. The babe's still in there. Well, you're in luck. We've a need and you've a body. I'll pay you the standard rate, 2 thalers. So little. The Pontifex sets the price, son, not I. He's a stickler for tradition. But think on the honour she'll find after death. I'm a fair man, though. Shall I throw in an extra thaler for the handcart as well? All right. Cassander did not look back as he gripped the coins and dodged through the thronged street to where his brother was sheltering from the winter winds. The lad was curled up under a street shrine, and his exhaustion made him oblivious to the clatter of carts and people rushing past his face. The idols of Sol and Luna glared down at him as though reproachful of his laggardly respite. Grime from the road caked both deities, dyeing them the same dun colour and making it only possible to tell them apart by their profile. The offering plate was bare, and old flaky wax from spent candles swamped the feet of the neglected gods. On your feet, big man. Cassander squatted and shook his brother gently from his sleep. How much did you get? Young Lysander's eyes were instantly alert and filled with the biting quickness their mother had gifted him. His cheeks were stung pink by the cold. 2, 3, including the cart, said Cassander sheepishly. It'll have to do, said Lysander sternly. We should buy a meal somewhere. No need. If we wait until the feast tonight, then we can eat the Pontifex's bounty for the festival. Cass, do you want to sleep some too? I'll watch over you. Cassander smiled tiredly to see his little brother so armed against the world. The boy had lived only 10 years, but already had the gravitas of a veteran prefect, his gift from their father. And what will you do if someone tries to rob us? What I have to. Lysander puffed up his little chest, and a baleful mood seeped from his eyes. Cassander mussed up his hair and pulled him tight for a hug. I'm not sleepy yet, big man. Maybe later. Let's have a walk about the place instead, yeah? It was the kind of god fort Cassander had been in and out of on the frontiers during his early years. Those had been the last futile efforts to expand the borders. He wrinkled his nose at the smell. This far from the front line, the fort was overpopulated and lacked the zealous cleanliness required by the army. He even had to steer Lysander away from a long alley when he realised what the graffiti daubed on its walls was advertising. They continued on, stamping their feet around the massive circular citadel, and gradually saw how the neat lines of its fortifications had been burst by the swelling population. With the afternoon sunset came bugles announcing the midwinter festivities had begun. An answering call rumbled from Cassander's stomach. Lysander chuckled. It was the first time he had smiled since the sickness came. They joined the already half-drunk citizenry trickling towards the temple. The smells of roasted meat and sweet wine grew stronger on the cold air as their progress slowed to a shuffle where the crowds grew thick about the temple steps. Lysander pushed insistently on his older brother's back. Cassander, willowy and lithe, wove them a path up the steps with deft shoves and apologies. The two of them slipped inside between a pair of the mighty columns that supported the grand dome of Sol over their heads. Within, 50 tables groaned under the enormous weight of food and drink which the sons of Sol priests had laid out against the winter scarcity. Haunches of meat sweated their juices into pewter platters. Ice fruits shone as the torchlight warmed them, and amphorae of wine from the motherland had been decanted into ornate carafes. The boys joined the other vagabonds who had forced their way to the tables first, and Cassander began passing food to his brother until the little lad's arms were full. Normally, he would have been trying to sneak some of the wine, but the days of cheekily eroding parental authority had been snatched from him. Instead, he shielded Lysander from the crowd and steered them into the lee of one of the pillars. They gorged, without thinking to chew, and smiled at each other with dirty faces when they were done. It was warm there, so Cass sat down with his back against the pillar. The music of harps and pipes seemed to pulse with the flow of the feast. Cass! Cass, wake up! She's here! Cassander shook himself and blinked away the sleep which had stolen up on him. His brother was crying. The shining rivers on his pink cheeks fell in miniature waterfalls from his jaw. Cass stood quickly and peered at the dais. The Pontifex was tall but bent-backed. His body was clad only in a toga fashioned from the cured hides of his predecessors, and he wore a crest of golden sun rays on his bald head. Beneath his toga, his skin was covered in fading tattoos of Holy Scripture. The Pontifex, flanked by braziers, raised his arms to the golden dome above them. The near-forgotten dogma of the Empire poured from his mouth. The hubbub of revellers and musicians was rapidly reduced to a susurrating quiet. "What's he saying?" asked Lysander, standing on his toes to be able to see. "I don't know, big man," lied Cassander. "I could never get my head around mother tongue." In truth, he did not want Lysander to know the words that had reshaped the world long ago. Cassander looked at the offering laid out before the Pontifex. It was the shapely form of a pregnant woman, and the perfect smoothness of her curves seemed to drink in the warmth of the nearby braziers. Peering at her, he could see the body had been moulded from wax, the colour of a blush, and beneath that surface was the shadow of a corpse. Her corpse. A knife glittered in the hand of the Pontifex as he beseeched the gods for the end of winter, for new life. Cassander squatted quickly and pulled his brother to face him. "Look at me now, big man. We did what we had to do. It'll be over in a moment, and then we'll eat some more, and we'll find a place to sleep. Properly sleep." Lysander, his lips still quivering, nodded and kept his eyes fixed on his older brother. There was an ardent shout, and the crowd gasped. The silence which followed was shattered by the cries of a mewling newborn. Cassander frowned and stood up to see what had happened. The Pontifex, having left his long knife wedged in the body before him, was holding up the wriggling form of a healthy baby boy, which he had pulled from the corpse. The child's lungs were powerful, and his screeches echoed around the temple. The look of confusion on the faces in the crowd around Cass quickly transformed into wide-eyed zeal. "Sol! It is Sol reborn!" someone shouted, and more took up the shout. They surged forwards, knocking over the heavy tables and crushing each other for a chance to reach the dais. "Praise him! Praise him!" they screamed, their minds lost to the miracle. More worshippers, made drunk by the feast, surged up the steps and pressed violently into the fray. Cassander saw one man lose his footing and, unable to rise, his head was stamped flat. Scooping up Lysander, Cassander cowered in the meagre shelter provided by the pillar at their backs. Hot tears of shame and panic blurred his vision as he clung to what remained of his family. In his arms, Lysander appeared to have grown oddly calm. With one whisper, he froze Cassander's heart. "Don't cry, Cass. Our sister son is going to rule the world."
I enjoyed that. Not in a that was fun way, but in a that was a good story way.
Oh, thank you.
Very bleak.
Very bleak. Yes.
I think "she's a bit ripe" might be one of the most horrible opening lines
It's gross,
you've
isn't it?
ever written, Ben.
Yeah,
It's really horrid.
yeah. Yes, I was knocking the concept around, and then that line said grossly popped into my head. I was like, okay, well that's where that starts then. Yes, it's been a time. I've had sort of Roman stuff on my head, so I wanted to
Yeah.
go into that a little bit, and then I was, of course, working through some, sun god cult, Christian worship stuff with it as well. I think.
It often falls on me to ask you if historic things are real. Is the skin toga
No,
a
no.
thing that
Well,
we are
it might
aware
be.
of?
I've got no idea. That's entirely like it's. I don't think this takes place in our world. To be honest, I think this is
Oh, okay.
this is a different place where potentially miracles can happen. What do you reckon, Anna?
Yeah, no, it was, yes, it was, yeah, it was, it was. It's funny because I'm not supposed to talk about my story, but I was like, oh gosh, this is interesting. From the prompt, but yeah, it was kind of really, as you'll see. But yeah, it was again, it was sort of really not going. It's like, gosh, this is not going where I possibly thought that prompt would go. And yes, it was sort of,
Okay,
it
yes,
was a
I think.
wonderful opening line. Yes, that was, yes, she's a bit ripe. Yes, that was a. So you're like, how can wait, what? And then yes, no, it was, yeah, it was really, it was very, really, really vivid. Yeah, really
Oh, thank
strong and
you.
vivid.
Yes, I think I had quite a bit of fun with that one.
Yes, yes,
For,
you could
for you,
see. Yes,
um, for either of you, do you think it was a miracle, or do you think it was a sort of switch out by the priests to create a fervor?
My money would normally be on something that's described as a miracle, but was in fact just medically unlikely in the
medically,
situation.
medically unlikely is a good term, I think.
so
Yeah.
I see. I always find the ones where we get, when it's explained, when you get the rational explanation, I always find extremely disappointing. That
Yeah.
kind of, yeah. I mean, as someone's pointed out, with magic systems, when you get, and it all kind of, the way sort of like Brandon Sanderson has those incredibly worked out magic systems, and you're like, that's not magic. That's the way physics works in your world. I can't remember, someone said that. That's not, but yeah, and I was like, yeah, that's completely. When you give the explanation, I really don't like the kind of, it's like basically the Scooby Doo ending, like, all this, we're going to unmask all the supernatural stuff. I much prefer it when it's just. So I'm going to go with it was a miracle. Might be a very cynical miracle. We might say, obviously, this church might be corrupt and cynical, and we might say all kinds of interesting things about where you were going with the way it kind of. I was sitting there at the beginning thinking, hang on, how would Winterfest come into this? And then like, okay, I see where Winterfest came into this. And then suddenly I was like, okay, I really see where Winterfest came into this, and this is really interesting where we're going with this. But yeah, the kind of, if you then just say, oh yeah, and it was some kind of trick, and it just, yeah. Let's go with it being a kind of strange, deeply corrupt, deeply cynical miracle.
I like it.
That's the kind of world we're in.
I think it's definitely, you're completely correct to not write the exact thing that happens. Like, you've got to leave something for the audience to play around with. I think otherwise it becomes a bit pointless.
I like looking at it as the Scooby Doo mask removal. That's a good.
Yeah.
It turns out that the Grand Sorcerer Nuzzleglad Cthulhu was actually Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was just a very clever physicist. That's what it was all along.
Yes.
There's a real element of that, I think, in some fantasy. There's that kind of, it's the sort of Wizard of Oz kind of, how's it done?
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't kind of want that. I just want the kind of the romance of what it just is.
That show that's always on Discovery, the How It's Made. I'd love to see a sort of in-world Forgotten Realms version of that. The fireball begins its life as a single mode of magic.
I feel like I'd hate that, but but I would laugh at it. So maybe that's worthwhile.
Maybe that's what I mean.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you for listening, and I think we should move on. Are you ready to read, Anna?
Yes, I think mine is shorter. Either than that, or I have very different. Yeah, I think mine is quite short. Short extract. That's right. Right.
That's
Good.
absolutely fine. Yeah,
Right.
we sometimes we put in something really quite short. This one was somewhere in the middle. This was about 1,300 words. I mean, we normally go between 800 and 1,500. So I think
Yeah, I think this is more like 800. I think.
Nice.
Yes,
That's
quite
absolutely
short.
fine. Wonderful.
Right.
Looking forward to it.
So it's the first couple of pages of chapter 11 of A Sword of Bronze and Ashes. So, winter had come to the Hall Rovin. The first great cold of winter. Snow lay thick around the high banks of the earthworks. The gatekeeper Benethal stamped his feet and blew on his hands to warm them, his hood crusted white. The birds gathered in the roof of the hall for shelter from the cold. Ravens, crows, wood-pigeons, hawks, red kites. Deer shivered in the pinewood. Wolves ran in the white fields, leaving black footprints. But inside the earthworks the snow did not settle. Inside the hall itself the hearth fire burned warm and without smoke. The Lord of Rovin wrapped his cloak around him, went out to the gates to set one foot on the snow there, poured offerings of wine and oil and the very last of the year's milk. Kind winter, lady, grant us that, on this the first cold day you bring. The lady's face was changeless, but the earth at her feet drank up the offerings gladly. For a moment a warm summer wind blew. Thank you, lady. The women in the hall are even now weaving your new spring cloak. When the dusk fell, all the people of Rovin went to the gate to watch the nightfall on the first snow of winter, the sun's death over the white cold, and the Lord of Rovin made offerings of a side of roast beef and 10 loaves of wheat bread. When the last of the gloaming had fled the sky, the people of Rovin lit the winter fires before the doors of Rovin, scattered wheat on the flames, leapt the flames. Lord Gallen, whose name means great leap, no matter how high the fire burned, he could always leap higher, though his cloak was scorched and singed and marked with smoke. The snow came faster, thicker, the white flakes like a swarm of bees. When the snow met the fire, it hissed. All the people of Rovin cheered the snow falling, although still the snow did not settle inside the great earthworks. A spell for a kind winter, and a night of fun. Alan leapt so high his heels seemed to touch the peak of the hall's roof. All the people cheered. But Galen gave a great cry, fell down almost into the fire, ran with all the people staring after him to the open gates. A dead man on a dead horse rode through the snow up to the open gates. The gatekeeper Benethal shouted warning, held out his ashwood spear to bar the way. The man held his horse steady outside the gates, with the snow thick covering him. But Galen pushed aside Benethal's spear, crossed beyond the gate, took the horse's bridle. Let him pass, Galen said. Let him come inside the circle of the fire where it is safe. Lord Moran said, This is madness. We leap the winter fire to keep such things as this far off from Rovin, not to invite them in. Let him pass, Galen said again. Lady Kestra said, Let him pass. Make a space at the fire for him. Denethor looked from one to the other. He put down his spear, crossed beyond the gate to join Galen. He held out his hands to help the dead man dismount. He said, "Welcome. Let us take your horse, give it a place in the stable out of the cold. You yourself come now to the winter fire, warm yourself. You are safe here, friend." The dead man dismounted. Denethor led the dead horse away. The dead man was cut and injured, so that Galen and Kestra between them had to help him walk. He came into the circle of the firelight. All the people gathered were silent, staring. Hands moved in signs against evil. But Galen and Kestra helped him as if he were a frightened child. His shield arm and his sword arm hung limp and useless. His throat had been cut. Galen said, "Can you speak?" Nervous laughter at that, it was so horrible. Lauren laughed nervously. Renan laughed. A noise like stones grinding together that made the dogs howl as the dead man spoke. Dead and maimed, I rode here with my horse dead under me. My throat is cut, but I must speak. Raiders have come from the west in their black ships. My wife is dead, my children taken. Through the snow and the dark, with wolves running at my horse's heels, I have come to beg the Six of Rovin to ride out. He pointed to the west. 5 hours' ride, no more. My village lies burning. Please, he said, weeping dead tears, I beg you, help them. I am dead, my children are lost, but some may yet live. There was a great, terrible silence. A long time, it seemed. Time enough for a child to die, a life to fall ruined. Just time enough for 2 tears to fall. The dead man slumped forward into the fire. The flames rushed up to give him peace. The horses were saddled. The Lady of Rovin came to press their swords into their hands. "We shall bury him with honour," the Lord of Rovin told the 6. "Now ride, ride!" The 6 did not need telling. Faster than the wind they rode, faster than thought, faster than breath. The wolves and the deer started up in terror at their passing. Their horses kicked up the snow that was piled as high as a man's waist. The clouds cleared. The moon rose white and brilliant. The moon with the old moon held in her arms for safekeeping. A good sign that, for the first great cold of winter. Frozen worlds stretched before the 6 in beauty that would have moved Kestra to song and Galen to laughter and Palais to verse, had they not seen such horror and known more horror was to come. They rode through the sleeping fields where in spring the wheat would grow, through a wood of pine trees sweet-scented, through a wood of birch and ash trees bare like reaching fingers, trunks of the birches whiter than the snow itself. As they rode, the moon fell behind them. Twin stars Ilruth were ahead of them. Star and bronze star, they were a gateway into which the 6 rushed. They rode through a wild place where there were neither trees nor fields. Between the stars now a light seemed to be shining. Anda reined her horse and said, "There, that is where the raiders are." A village burned like a vast winter bonfire. Flames made the shapes of men with spears and axes. Kestra said, "I am afraid." "How many times have we ridden out?" said Morin. "How many victories have we won?" He drew his sword and tossed it high in the air. When the sun rises, we will have won another victory. Winter fire will still be burning when we ride home again. And there we go. What happens next? I shall leave to those who
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Oh, that was wonderfully read. I would say ethereal was the way that you went with that. That was delightful.
Thank you.
What
A touch of Galadriel to it,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah, for sure, yeah. That was fantastic. Seriously, I haven't read this book yet, but obviously I will. But that is just the way that you built everything up and then paid it off really satisfyingly, very quickly. Because you said that's inside like 800-900 words.
That's a bit longer, actually. I went on for a little more. I think that's probably about 1,000, maybe.
Okay,
spoilers.
Yeah, absolutely. But the establishment, the establishing of the it's something as simple as the wolves and the deer at the start with that winter imagery that you created, and then to have them be startled when they ride out. It means that the whole world feels like it's active and dynamic, and I really enjoyed it a lot. And that's just the structural thing, like the actual content, the dead man on a dead horse.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, really good.
The description of his, when it said that his throat was cut and then his voice sounded like the stones scraping across each other and it making like setting the dogs off. That was really cool. I knew exactly what I was hearing. That was great description. So I don't forget to say it. The line, the very last of the year's milk. There's something about the construction of that line that absolutely pulled me into what was happening. That this was a huge moment for these people to spend the last of a resource that precious. I was like, okay, so this is a big deal. That did so much scene setting for me for what is it's a very simple line, but it is perfectly placed.
See, I'm a historian. I'm originally a classical historian, but I've always been interested in British history and folklore and archaeology. But I read an awful lot of history and archaeology, and the kind of trying to reconstruct, particularly ritual behaviour. You get so many archaeological reports where people are sort of saying there's this kind of, people talk about anomalous burials or anomalous ritual deposits and things, and actually kind of archaeologists really beginning to realise that in a particular subsistence culture and in a climate like ours where you have one bad harvest or one bad winter, and if you're in a subsistence economy, your whole community is completely starved. So ritual and things being important and magic and things like, so the coming of winter is obviously hugely important because you might not survive. Certainly your animals might not survive, your herds might not survive, if your fields are flooded, or your whole future depends on getting through the winter. So this idea of giving rituals and offerings and things seems completely logical, and there's lots of evidence for all kinds of ritual activity and things and sacrifices and offerings being made that I think probably do link to things, obviously, to the harvest. So classical stuff, I've read a lot of stuff about rituals through the year. People always think of ancient Greece as this really rational place. People have this idea of it's they're all these people in all these sort of men being terribly rational philosophers in cities, but actually it wasn't. It was an incredibly ritualized society. So that thing about the new cloak, every year the statue of Athena in the Parthenon, Athena Parthenos, the women of in Athens some of the girls would be chosen, highborn girls, to weave a new cloak for her every year as an offering.
Wow.
Statue. And there's something, it was obviously, it's incredibly important. It was very prestigious for a girl to be chosen for her whole family, but also it was incredibly important to do this because there is this kind of sense, if you don't put a lot, and it is a big statue, it would have been a lot of cloth. So when you're working on a hand loom, that would have been a lot of work. And if you don't put in that investment, you're really potentially building up a lot of trouble because you're not you're not placating the goddess. And obviously, and in a essentially still a subsistence economy, which Greece and classical Athens was, you really don't want to take any risks. So yeah, that whole notion of actually things, sort of life being, we have it as still as the kind of the harvest festival in school, where you bring in a couple of tins of food and it's given away to a local homeless shelter or something. That has a direct link still to this kind of idea of locating nature and everything being linked to the elements and luck and good fortune and prosperity, and essentially making sure that your next year you have enough food that you survive, and and your children don't get sick and things. So yeah, that's where all that came from. And then it turned into a proper, and then obviously we've got a proper sort of midwinter ghost story on top of that.
Midwinter ghost story into an epic gallop out of mighty heroes. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Really, really good stuff. I noticed, just on speaking on the influences on the festivities, the whole jumping over the fire thing, is that from Beltane? The sort of midsummer fertility.
Yes. I mean, it's a very, again, jumping the fire. I did go to one. I have been to one pagan hand fasting wedding where people jump the fire, and yeah, so jumping the fire is again it's actually quite a common thing, because it has such a kind of obviously symbolic, powerful imagery, and it does recur in various different circumstances, I think worldwide, jumping the fire. But kind of, but also because the character Great Leap, I mean, that actually, his name actually comes from, I think there's a character in the Mabinogion who's called who's the Leap, son of Leaper. It's one of the names that's listed in the Quest for Allwen, when you have this great long list of all these. Some of the characters, some are actually almost certainly were real people, and some are just these insane, like Listen, son of Hera, and Look, son of Looker, and Leap, son of Leaper. And that idea of great leap, and that sort of no matter how high the flames rise, he can jump over it, came from that.
The Welsh mythos collection, isn't it? The Mabinogion.
Yes.
Oh wow! Yeah, I mean, the whole leaping over the fire thing was really well constructed, I think, because it gave us a sense of their power as well. This idea of these great leaps and the heels nearly touching the roof and things like that. It really drew me in. Just Nico mentioned that he had a line that got him, so I wanted to say the line that got me in as well, which was that when the last of the gloaming had fled the sky. I like sky imagery, so that one tickled me just the right way.
I mean, if we're talking about lines that stood out, so he wept dead tears.
Yep.
There's some that's so deeply haunting. The idea that even your weeping passes on to be something different after death. That's very, very cool. Cool might not be the right word.
Yeah, the stranger is definitely the bit that for me, I think I'm going to be thinking about that dead man on the dead horse for a long time after this, which is great. It's a good sign. But that idea of making space for a stranger at the fire, that has a real folktale ring to it, doesn't it? This, like, in a way that they might be punished for not doing that. Like,
it's incredibly important. There's all these kind of rituals about hospitality and welcoming people, because again, that kind of, it's so important. There's really interesting stuff in both the Mabinogion and the Irish sagas about the importance of hospitality and welcoming people, because again, partly for practical reasons, you're just dependent on others. That if you have you have to have a society that welcomes people in before you have inns and hotels and that kind of thing. You have to be dependent on someone taking you in. But also, this world, the world that Sword of Bronze and Ashes is set in, it's trying to be a world that is more positive than Empires of Dust. Empires of Dust is an amazingly bleak series. I didn't realise until afterwards, I suppose, how bleak bits of it are. But it is certainly a cruel world. It is a world where people are often motivated by selfishness or by self-interest, and are quite casually cruel to each other. And then A Woman of the Sword, which is the kind of sort of sequel to that, or set in the sort of in the same world of that. Again, it's it's a very bleak world. It's people struggling to survive. And what I really wanted to create here is a more domestic folk world. The characters are lords and ladies. A world of normal, ordinary
I think
people
that
living.
1 second, Anna. Sorry, that I think that cut out.
It's not about
You said
the
it's a
intrigue
normal
and
world.
the how do I about the way you love. It's a normal people, but
1 second.
it's really about thinking about. Oh dear, something terrible.
Sorry, I think it's either on my. It might be on my end. I think.
No,
Nico.
I believe it's Anna.
Right.
You had a bit of an internet sort of lag spike there, and we sadly
dear.
we lost you in the middle.
Oh, sorry. Hang on.
So
I know what's happened. No, my internet has collapsed. Oh. Have I come back again?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry, my internet started playing up. Sorry, I think my internet
Yeah,
dropped.
okay.
No,
I
it
think it's having
happens.
a wobble. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No. I was saying that. Yeah, I wanted this to be a world of people who are not people who are kind of jostling for power and megalomaniac and suspicious of each other. I wanted it to be about. So it's a community, and obviously it is. People are lords and ladies, but again, I wanted them to have that kind of, because they're much more kind of normal, not all powerful, not ruthless. They're the kind of welcoming that I'd like to think I'm like, or that most people listening to this are like. That, you know, if someone comes to your door needing help, you'd let them in and not turn them away, and that kind of kindness. I wanted it to be a world of people who were kind and not just motivated by self-interest, but where, yeah, obviously you'd make space for a stranger at the fire on a cold winter night, because the opposite of Empires of Dust, where people would kind of are suspicious, and it's a world where it's a harsh, bitter world where you would be suspicious and you would think the person was possibly out to get you, or you would be thinking what advantage you could get. But here I wanted it to be people who, you know, the way I'd like to think most of us would be. If someone comes up to the fire on a cold night, you make space for them. You offer them some food and drink.
I like that.
You might endlessly be disappointed in them, but
maybe
you won't be. Yes.
Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one last thing, which is that I really enjoyed the opposition that you set up between the good omen of the moon and the evil deeds that were happening and the tension of the scene that they were going into. That felt very stylistically strong. So I enjoyed that bit. So.
Oh, thank you. That actually comes from, we were talking about Fairport Convention earlier. There's a lovely bit in the Ballad of Patrick Spens that they do a version of. It's about, let's talk about the new moon in the old moon's arms, which is, I love that image so much. I really think it's such a beautiful, beautiful image, and you do occasionally see it, and it is this really strange, beautiful thing when you see that the new moon sort of holding the old moon. So yeah, I just wanted to put that in because it just felt, it is such a magical thing, and this image of them in the night riding through the snow. Yeah, I just wanted to be there to be beautiful, and yeah, that it's a good omen for the winter. But then yes, this bad thing is also happening that's apart from that, and sort of yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, before we move on to the final story, which will be from Nico, and I know he's potentially sweating bullets going last.
Yeah, no thanks.
We just want to mention again that was an excerpt from A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, and I'm sure that you can get that anywhere that you can buy books.
Yes, online. Yes, certainly online. Yes.
Wonderful. Is there anywhere in particular you'd like people to get it from, or is it?
No, I mean you can actually. So it's published by my publisher is a publisher called Flame Tree Press, and you can buy direct from their website, which obviously is much buying from there or from Waterstones. If you're listening to this in the UK, buying either direct from Flame Tree or from Waterstones. I think Waterstones are still marginally better than Amazon. I don't think they're quite as. But yeah, if you buy direct from Flame Tree is obviously the best because you're not paying the
Yeah.
margin. But yeah, buying from a or an independent bookshop. Buy from an independent bookshop. They can usually order. They can order pretty much everything. Books on the Hill. Anyone knows them in Bristol or outside Bristol in Clevedon. I think they post UK wide. They specialise in fantasy, science fiction, and history and historical novels.
That sounds like my
They
kind
do
of
a
place.
special
I
do a
love it.
special range of dyslexic books for adults as well that are in dyslexic font. They're not.
Ah, we were talking
Yes.
about this with a recent guest. We were talking about this with Jan Foster, and
Yes.
I hadn't heard that there was a font that helps with that, but that's really inclusive and good
They do
and just
these.
useful.
Yes, and they do post. They post all over Britain, and yes, they support them. Support your small local independent bookshop wherever you are. Or
I'd be remiss if I didn't say go and ask the library to get a copy in as well,
Oh yeah.
because then you read it and so can everyone else.
yes,
Okay then, Nico, you're up. Let's see
Oh.
this last one.
Okay. Winterfest. The culture of the village has changed beyond recognition in the pair of centuries that followed the end of seasons. It was heralded first as a glorious gift. Endless spring. But soon enough, when frolicking had become tiresome, the people became concerned. No crops were sprouting. An endless procession of dandelions sprung to herald the coming months of growth, but not one found itself a clock. No tiny seeds to drift on the wind and wake the pollinators. It had been out of desperation, as the heavy stores of food ran thin, that they began to yearn for summer, and more importantly, the autumn that would follow. Harvest. The people were in need of harvest. Without it, they would starve. A council of holy thinkers posited their ideas, and it was after many failed attempts to shift the natural world from its slumber that they turned to darker texts. It was reckoned, by one whose name is lost to time, possible to offer sacrifice to the summer gods to tempt them in. The same again for autumn. Winter too, should they ever want it, though the people could see no reason to live beyond the autumn again. Should the wheat grow as the dandelion did now, endless, in perfect health. Their first attempts did not work, and so to the text they returned. It had been in secret, but as the people began to starve, and the threat of eating their dogs, their horses, and then perhaps, should the eternal spring continue, one another loomed, the elders offered up what they were seeking to do. It was in so doing that the ancient forbidden texts were mingled with the folklore of the people, and they determined then an order of things. That the girls of the village, as yet unblossomed, would blossom the seasons. Girls with hair bright as golden sun they would need to herald summer, and auburn hair to bring around the autumn. The first girl they killed, the stories name her Fee, had golden hair and a smile so radiant they could have believed the summer was already there. When they took her to the square and marked her undefiled, she bid farewell with, it seemed, little understanding as to her purpose. From her, they say, where the knife was plunged, a glow of sunlight came, and the world at once was thrown to summer. Heavy fruits ripened on the branches about them, and the moon rolled back to allow the late summer evening its place. They called it Summerfest. People rejoiced, for a time, and lived on the succour of summer wines and glorious long days. They were for 2 decades or more in a state of thronging merriment. Bacchanal were those endless summers, until they'd forgotten their woes and chosen to live forever in the state of sun-drenched euphoria. But after all that time, the people wanted to taste bread again. They wanted to show their children what the leaves did when they browned and curled. So it was agreed. A girl of auburn hair was chosen, though it was difficult. With no movement to the seasons, no womb seemed to fill with child, and so there were few who were not an infant never known beyond the summer, or a woman old enough to have lost herself within the temptations of it. The agelessness had seemed a blessing before, but now it was a curse. Folk fought bitterly to save their daughters, for why should they not taste of bread or smell the bonfire? There was a deal of killing, and it was fortunate that the lives of all did not move the seasons, for otherwise they would have changed so quickly that who knows what would have become of the life that surrounded us. In the end, a girl took her own life to save her mother from the mob. Their home, it is said, turned gold and orange in a moment, before tendrils spread like fires licking tongue through the greenery of summer. It was autumn. In the decades that have passed, many girls my age, or at very least the age we were when the seasons stopped, have been given to the gods. Their purity ensured and managed to further the seasonal dictatorship of our little lives. Summerfest, where we eat our way through crops enough to feed 1,000,000 armies, and drink our fill of wine and ale. Autumnfest, for when we must replenish and give our skin a break from dozens of years baking in the sun. The adults, so often tired from their merriment as from reaping the season's bountiful magnificence, have not noticed what I have. There are almost no girls my age anymore. I have survived as I have because my hair is black. They're not sure what would come if I was taken and spilled on their soil. We've had golden light and orange leaves intermingled for so long that I think they're befuddled by the concept of anything other. Autumnfest, Summerfest, Autumnfest, Summerfest. We gather and murder one of our own with candles and songs and promises of an afterlife that surely, if any of these adults believed in, they would allow themselves to die. I've seen so many people die as the numbers of our village dwindle ever smaller, and I'm tired of it to my very bones. I remember the last winter, before the eternal spring stopped. The bare bones of trees looming in the crisp ink-black void. The crunch of autumn's chilled remains beneath my feet. The tendrils of breath curling like the ghosts of unformed words between my teeth. It was wonderful. I've gathered candle stubs for years. I don't know if they're made of something special, but I'd rather not take the risk. And I know the songs, we all do. And I think my voice will be enough if I sing the words with conviction. Last week they killed the last summer child. Summerfest was glorious and gave me the last of my wax. And now there are no more blondes and no more auburn-haired girls. No more women trapped on the verge of blossoming, only to be punished with eternal purity. No more decades of solitude, sobriety, and misery. All years must come to an end. I sing the words with practiced ease, and I watch the candles burn down. As I open my throat wide, I feel the ice crystals forming on my skin, and with glee I watch the sky plunge to dark. In my last moments of sensation, I feel snowflakes melt and burn on my skin. Enjoy our first Winterfest, you bastards. At last, I'm free.
Top fucking notch. And we're going to be having to put a content trigger warning on this episode as well.
Yeah, possibly.
Wow, fantastic. I was so uncomfortable with your concept for the first 2/3 of that story. Just this constant discussion of like the purity of these girls and the unblossomed nature of them, and how this society went straight to killing girls. Like they didn't even try anything else. They didn't even try any mushrooms for a bit. Yeah, that was absolutely horrible. And then that the relief and satisfaction that I got from the turn being this girl. No, obviously, as soon as she's introduced, you know what she's going to have to do. But already
Yeah.
you're like, this is a great way for the revenge to happen in this scenario. I enjoyed that a lot. Thank you.
I'm glad, man.
Yes,
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. It made complete sense. Thing is, it did. The way that, yeah, they're just what they were doing made complete sense in sort of mythological folklore sense tropes. That just, yeah, that's just completely. You could just completely see the folklore logic of it, and yeah, it was. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. It was really interesting that kind of, yeah. So I sort of had this, sort of gave you Winterfest, and you both went on
Yeah.
kind of, yeah.
I know where you're
Yeah,
going with that.
yes,
Yes, wherever did that come from? It's almost like we've
yes.
grown up inside some sort of oppressive patriarchy or something. But yeah, no, the desecration and murder of women apparently is part of a religious rite at the turning of the seasons.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a sort of, that, and just that beginning when you're talking about the no season, sort of no, not having seasons anymore, and that actually that kind of sense of horror about that, but that's kind of what we're heading for. I remember years ago there's sort of idiot people who'd say, "Oh, global warming, it'll be wonderful. Britain will be like Tuscany," and you were like, "Yeah, well, what happens to people in Tuscany then?" But now you're like, okay, so global warming. Britain is not like Tuscany. What Britain's going to be like is it's going to rain like 350 days a year, and then we're going to get 10 days where it's 40 days heat, and we're going to get 10 days where it's minus 10 degrees and freezing, and the rest of the year it's just going to rain. And yay, that's British weather from now on. And yeah, and that horror of like, yeah, not getting proper seasonal changes, and not having those warm days, and not having that cold crisp. You're just describing her. Finally, we get snow, and we get dark, and we get trees against the bare trees against the sky, and how awful it'd be not to have that. In fact, I'd really miss winter. I'd really, really miss autumn and winter.
I think that was the heart of it, wasn't it? The way that you approach the seasons in a very novel way. Just it really shone a light on everything there is to love about each of those, and how without the whole package, there is a huge fucking problem. Like I was immediately thinking about how they would have no apples from the autumn, so there'd be no no cider, no nothing. Like it's just
no beer because there's no wheat and
yeah. No, deeply unpleasant. I think I just after the conversation we had earlier about like untangling magical systems and making them work, I think my brain kept on trying to make more sense of it than it needed to have made sense of it. I think like I was thinking, would it have worked for anybody that was pregnant to be sort of like in stasis per season sort of thing? So you'd get sort of 3 months of a pregnancy for 10 years. Are the women walking around partially pregnant? Or is it just not like nothing is growing? Or do things grow when the seasons switch? You can sort of see where my brain got a little bit confused.
Yeah.
But where I kept on being drawn back into it was in the excellent way you just cut through all of that bullshit. It's a bit like that movie Looper with Bruce Willis, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, where there's a time loop, and he just says when they're trying to figure it out and try and explain the time loop thing, which is a bit of a plot hole. I think Bruce Willis's character just sort of says, "Look, don't even think about that. It'll scramble your brain. Just move on. Just move on from this." So I as soon as I managed to do that, I was fully lost to this really unpleasant society that then gets exactly what's coming to it.
I can, as the person who made this magical scenario, I can tell you that it's absolute bobbins. I have no idea how it works, but it was an allegory for the mistreatment of young women as they grow into not young women or less young women.
Because I often say to people who are sort of starting out writing fantasy that it's that point when you start thinking, ooh, how would this actually work? The implications of this, and you start digging yourself a bigger and bigger hole. And then you start trying to find a way. You can tell when people are feeling a bit, oh, I'm not sure if this really works. I'm feeling a bit embarrassed about this. I'm not convinced by this. And you can tell in the writing where people are trying to give some kind of really detailed explanation for how it doesn't work or whatever. So you try and put in something to explain what's happening, why it is that women aren't having children, all this in your, and then the reader's just like, okay, you've actually opened up that gaping. It is that kind of protesting too much. As soon as just go over it with the confidence of, okay, this is just what it is, and it might be that 2 days after you finish reading this book, you're suddenly like, hang on a minute, but at the time you were enjoying it and it was just working, and that is best. But that's going to be better than someone reading the book and thinking like, hang on, the author's not entirely convinced about this, because the authors begin to think about digging themselves more and more and more, deeper and deeper and deeper. But what if, and then what if, and then what if, and that means, and that just having the confidence of just skating over it and basically hoping no one notices is actually the best way. It's actually the best way around it, because as soon as you start getting a bit embarrassed and tangled up in trying to explain the complex metaphysics or physics of things like, so what's going on with people not being able to get pregnant, or are they pregnant, or were, or whatever whatever your slight plot hole is, it just draws massive attention to it. Whereas if you just go over it, it's much easier. It's much better. It works much better.
You can
People
ignore the
agonising over
stagehands.
this.
Yeah.
You can ignore stagehands right up until someone makes them wear a high vis. That's kind of
Yes.
God, it is deeply unsettling that both of those stories went in that direction, though, isn't it? That is just,
isn't it? Just
there's always something that connects our stories, and I think it comes from years of telling stories in close proximity with each other. But this is potentially one of the most unsettling ones for me, anyway. So I think we'll have to go and examine this. But I think that draws to a close the story section. And I tell you what, that was an absolutely phenomenal excerpt that you read earlier. So thank you very much for that. Just before we end the story episode, would you be up for just letting people know where they can follow news about your work online, and any other places that they should check out about your work?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter as Queen of Grimdark, which I still have some Twitter followers. I kind of feel I don't use it very much anymore. I'm on Blue Sky and Facebook and Instagram as Anna Smith Spark. I'm trying to use Blue Sky more and more. I'm not sure I quite kind of like it politically, but I'm not sure I like it. It's you can see why Twitter was so successful. Sorry, I'm going completely off the topic of just quickly talking about. You can see why Twitter works technically. It doesn't work anymore. But so I'm on Twitter as Queen of Grimdark, and then Blue Sky, Facebook, and Instagram as Anna Smith Spark, and I'm actually on TikTok and YouTube as Anna Smith Spark, and I occasionally post videos, including little short videos of me doing readings. So I think there's another version of. I think there is a video possibly of me reading that, and there's definitely videos of me reading various things on there. So yeah, TikTok I'm trying to get my head around a bit. And I don't have a newsletter. I really should have a newsletter, but it's the burden of having to keep sending them out. But I do have a really rubbish website called courtofbrokennKnives.org.
Wonderful.
Or possibly .net, .something.
1 second, let me just. I was on it 2 days ago. .net.
And that's got .net. That's got some very cool videos on it as well.
Excellent. Right. Well, join us for the next episode where we will be asking Anna the Spark some questions. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, Well, magic can only take one so far. The tiny bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne, and for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?